It's Monday, March 10th, 2025. Trump says the country is on the right track. Kristi Noem is starting to get to the bottom of leakers at DHS. And Gavin Newsom started a podcast and a civil war. Next on the AM Update.
I think the country's got a big light over it right now.
They will be prosecuted, and they could face up to 10 years in federal prison.
The problem is they're being ambushed right now by what are some, in many cases, paid protesters. You've got George Soros-funded groups.
Congressman, why should men be in women's sports?
Shorts. I love you so much, but I've always wanted a partner to be on the same wavelength.
Would you do something like that? Would you say no men in female sports?
Well, I think it's an issue of fairness. I completely agree with you on that. So that's easy to call out.
Donald Trump was interviewed by Fox's Maria Bartiromo on Sunday and says you could see a little bit of pain in the short term, but the changes he's endeavoring to make in the federal government for the economy are overall going to be worth it.
Are you expecting a recession this year?
I hate to predict things like that. There is a period of transition because what we're doing is very big. We're bringing wealth back to America. That's a big thing. And there are always periods of, it takes a little time. It takes a little time. But I think it should be great for us. I mean, I think it should be great.
That's about as close as you're going to get from Donald Trump to saying, yep, there's going to be some short-term pain. But I appreciate the honesty nonetheless in his own way. Trump says overall he's still very optimistic about where the country is headed.
Because we're doing great things in this country. This country's really got a chance to be pretty quickly great again. I think the country has got a big light over it right now. And I've been told this by even other foreign leaders. We had Modi, we had everywhere. We had from France to India to about 12 that want to come in. They all want to be here. Every one of them wants to be here. We had the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom who was here, and he couldn't believe. He said the difference in terms of the feeling about the United States is very different.
Donald Trump's interview with Maria Bartiromo on Fox News yesterday morning. Also yesterday morning in Washington, D.C., Secret Service shot an armed man near the White House. A man brandishing a firearm approached a Secret Service checkpoint near the White House on Saturday afternoon, actually. Secret Service officers ordered the man to drop his weapon, but he refused to comply. After he pointed the gun towards them, an officer shot him in the lower body. A Secret Service spokesman said the situation was controlled rather quickly.
As officers approached, the individual brandished a firearm, at which time an armed encounter ensued, and Secret Service personnel discharged their service weapons.
Secret Service also says the suspect was quickly detained and then taken to a hospital with unknown injuries. Two people within the Department of Homeland Security have been accused of disclosing DHS operations amid the Trump administration's mass deportation plans. The names of the two alleged leakers were not disclosed. DHS spokeswoman Tricia McLaughlin told the media outlets they're expected to face charges. Yesterday morning, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem went on Face the Nation on CBS and add more context to what happened.
Tweeted, "The FBI is so corrupt. We'll work with any and every agency to stop leaks." Were you wrong then to blame the FBI if the leaks were from within DHS?
No, I think there's leakers all over throughout this government. I think that everybody needs to be, I think these, and DHS specifically, these two, were leaking our enforcement operations that we had planned and we're going to conduct in several cities and expose law enforcement to vulnerabilities, to those ops being jeopardized to where their lives would be in danger. So they will be prosecuted, and they could face up to 10 years in federal prison because they did that. Anyone who is leaking information outside of how something is planned for the safety of those law enforcement officers needs to be held accountable for that.
And you're going to continue these polygraphing
absolutely
of employees?
The authorities that I have under the Department of Homeland Security are broad and extensive, and I plan to use every single one of them to make sure that we're following the law, that we are following the procedures in place to keep people safe, and that we're making sure we're following through on what President Trump has promised.
Sounds like CBS News didn't really get her mic placement down there. That's what all those scratches are that you heard. But at least there's some action. Some people are being held accountable here. And it sounds like there's a couple of leakers they found at DHS. They could be liable for criminal penalties. Cheering for justice and accountability is always a good thing. Now, if you paid any attention to mainstream media, why? why, but if you have, you've probably noticed that the main thing they've been talking about the last couple of weeks are these town halls featuring Republican congressmen and women being derailed by Democrat activists. Well, of course, they're not characterizing that as such, but that's what's really going on here. A bunch of paid Democrat activists, as we'll hear in a moment, are showing up to these Republican town halls, creating a scene and creating content for left-wing media. House Speaker Mike Johnson says there's a usual suspect who's behind the funding of these town hall disruptions.
Look, I mean, we have Republicans who want to go out and be among their constituents and hear their concerns and dialogue with them. It's a big part of the job. But the problem is they're being ambushed right now by what are some, in many cases, paid protesters. You've got George Soros-funded groups. They're very well organized. That's one thing Democrats do very well, is this organization, right? And they go an hour or two early before the event. They fill all the seats. And so the actual constituents of these Republican members can't actually make it into the arenas. And so it's not a productive dialogue at all. They're just walking into an ambush. So we've encouraged our members to think thoughtfully about that. There are a lot of ways now with technology to be in constant dialogue with your constituents. You can do telephone town halls and get 10,000 people on the phone at the same time. You can have small group meetings with industry or organization groups or various parts of your community, and it'd be very productive. So we want to do the job, do it well, do it efficiently and effectively, and walking into a staged production like that doesn't serve anyone's interest.
Completely agree. Yep, completely agree. And I've seen that certain Republican leadership have basically told their caucus to stop doing these in-person town halls. And that sucks. But why would you just continue to keep walking into an obvious, paid, and set up, just basically circus paid for by George Soros? The optics of that are just unnecessarily bad. So I'm totally fine with Republicans skipping out on town halls. Now here's something I'm not exactly fine with. Two millennial congresswomen have become unlikely allies on legislation to cap credit card interest rates at 10%, a policy that President Trump previously pitched on the 2024 campaign trail. Representatives Anna Paulina Luna of Florida and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, both 35 years old, who usually find themselves on opposite sides of issues, unveiled legislation late last week to immediately stop credit card interest rates from jumping above 10%. Luna said in a statement, quote, "For too long, credit card companies have abused working-class Americans with absurd interest rates, trapping them in an almost insurmountable load of debt. We need a fair solution, and that means getting rid of the status quo and putting a reasonable cap on interest rates." This sounds like a good idea if you haven't really thought it through at all, but this is always going to, putting caps on anything, putting price caps on anything is, in the long run, going to end up hurting the very people that you're purportedly trying to help. Putting a cap on interest rate at 10% is going to result in a host of other unintended consequences like rising fees. I mean, these companies, these credit card companies, aren't just going to take a haircut. They're not just going to do that. They're going to raise fees on everybody, especially those who are maybe higher risk borrowers. And the worst case scenario, and probably a likely scenario at this, is that those high risk borrowers, the ones with a thin credit file, they're just going to be told no when they're trying to get access to credit. It's going to end up hurting the people it purports to help the most. A South Carolina man who killed his ex-girlfriend's parents with a baseball bat was executed by firing squad on Friday. It's the first U.S. prisoner in 15 years to die by that method, which he saw as preferable to the electric chair or lethal injection. 3 volunteer prison employees used rifles to carry out the execution of Brad Sigmund, 67 years old, who was pronounced dead at 6:08 p.m. Sigmund killed David and Gladys Lark in their Greenville County home in 2001 in a botched plot to kidnap their daughter. He told police he planned to take her for a romantic weekend and then kill her and himself. He ended up choosing the firing squad over lethal injection or the electric chair. Now, the thought occurred to me, am I just messed up in the head or just overly morbid? The thought occurred to me, is there any possible way when it comes to lethal injection? Is there any possible way to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that prisoners who are executed by that method are not in pain as they're passing? Not that they don't deserve it. I'm just asking. It's billed as a painless, humane way of killing somebody. Are we sure? Maybe this guy was actually, aside from being just a terrible, terrible human being and probably in hell right now, and definitely deserving of a death sentence, Maybe this guy was smart for choosing the firing squad. First time in 15 years. Quickly, here's Congressman Steve Cohen being cornered by a Fox News reporter on the issue of dudes playing in women's sports.
Congressman, how are you?
Okay, thank you.
Congressman, why should men be in women's sports?
Shorts?
Sports. Why do you think
They should not be in shorts.
They really are having a difficult time messaging on this issue because it's an impossible issue. It's an impossible issue to message on. We'll talk about that more in Air Analysis because Gavin Newsom, California governor, Gavin Newsom, started a podcast trying to maybe recoup his image with the American public. Started a podcast and inadvertently started a civil war in the Democrat Party. When we come back, escalation in Gaza, more details on just what happened to legendary actor Gene Hackman, and some stunning data and some serendipity on when that data dropped. Tell you what I'm talking about next. Israel says it's cutting off its electricity supply to Gaza. The full effects of that are not immediately clear, but the territory's desalination plants receive power for producing drinking water. Sunday's announcement comes a week after Israel cut off all supplies of goods to the territory of over 2 million people. It has also sought to press Hamas to accept an extension of the first phase of their ceasefire. That phase ended last weekend. Israel wants Hamas to release half of the remaining hostages in return for a promise to negotiate a lasting truce. Hamas has pressed to start negotiations on the ceasefire's more difficult second phase instead, which would see the release of remaining hostages from Gaza, the withdrawal of Israeli forces, and a purported lasting peace. Hamas is believed to have 24 living hostages and the bodies of 35 others. The militant group said Sunday it wrapped up the latest round of ceasefire talks with Egyptian mediators without changes to its position, calling for an immediate start of the ceasefire's second phase. Gene Hackman died due to heart disease, with Alzheimer's disease as a significant contributing factor. It's according to New Mexico officials, confirming the news late last week. He was likely alone in the home for about a week until he died around February 18th, which was the last time activity was recorded on his pacemaker. His wife, Betsy Arakawa, died due to hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, which is transmitted from animals to humans and is commonly found in rodents. Her autopsy determined the manner of death as natural. Authorities believe she died on or about February 11th. Chief Medical Investigator Dr. Heather Gerald performed a full autopsy on Hackman the day after his body was discovered, which showed severe heart disease, including multiple surgical procedures involving the heart, evidence of prior heart attacks, and severe changes of the kidneys due to chronic high blood pressure. The medical examiner noted that Hackman's pacemaker data indicated abnormal rhythm of the heart around February 18th. Said it was reasonable to conclude Arakawa died the week before Hackman, with the actor's death likely on February 18th. What a sad story. And I've heard about hantavirus as well, that being the cause of death for Betsy Arakawa, his wife. I've heard of that. It sounds like a nasty disease and really kind of scary, especially in the Southwest, I think is where it's most common. But her passing away a week before he did, he likely just having Alzheimer's, probably was confused why there was a person sleeping on the bathroom floor. That's probably what it was for about a week before he passed away as well. What a legendary actor and a sad, sad end to his life. Well, a hat tip to prolific author and scholar Nancy Pearcey for the compilation of this data. It is astounding. Astounding. Listen to this. This is data compiled from the Survey Center on American Life, Gallup, Financial Times, a couple of Korean outlets, as well as others. British Election Study would be the other one. This shows the direction over the past 2 decades, and in some cases 3 decades. This shows the direction in terms of ideology that young men and women are heading towards. And it is astounding. These are 18 to 29-year-olds divided on sex. In South Korea, going back to around 2005, both young men and young women, consider themselves slightly liberal. And then you see the divergence that happens in the next 25 years. By about 30 points now in South Korea, young women see themselves as liberal, while young men see themselves by about 20 points or more as conservative. That's only about a 50-point gap. How about in the United States, going back to 1990, it was more likely that men would be more conservative than women by about, looks like maybe 15 points. Now in 2020 or 2025, women in the United States, young women in the United States, see themselves as liberal by 40% more, 40 points more than men do. The data that Nancy Pearcey shared only goes to 2020. We know that divergence is even more stark in the aftermath of the 2024 election. In Germany, the same story. By about 25 points, women are more likely to call themselves as liberal than men, who see themselves as slightly conservative in Germany. Same thing in the United Kingdom, although both men and women consider themselves, even to this day, as liberal, but women far more so. This cannot hold forever. You can't just have half of civilization seeing themselves as up and the other half seeing themselves as down and expect there to be any babies being made in the near future. And then how about this? This data was shared by the account Amuse, but it was compiled by Nancy Pearcey, scholar, author, prolific. This was shared on the same weekend that this clip went viral. This is a clip from the Netflix show Love is Blind. And the basic premise of Love is Blind is that they have a bunch of people in various locales. Each season it's in a new locale. It's built around the tagline, "Is love truly blind?" It tests the idea that people can fall in love and commit to marriage without ever seeing each other, relying solely on emotional and intellectual compatibility. This clip went viral this weekend. It's of a woman named Sarah and a man named Ben. And this is from the Love is Blind Minnesota edition. They actually went to the Twin Cities and recorded a season of the show there. They are about to get married. They are at the altar when Sarah says this.
I love you so much. But I've always wanted a partner to be on the same wavelength. And so today I can't. I'm sorry, but I don't want that to be misunderstood. I still love you and everything about you is amazing. Mm-hmm. And I care about you so much.
I care about you too. And I love you so much. And I know I want to stay with you and keep growing our relationship if you'll let me.
No, bro.
Like, I feel like I know him. Like, really. Yeah. Like, I remember, like, I asked him about, like, Black Lives Matter, and I'm no expert. But, like, when I asked him about it, he was like, I guess I never really thought too much about it. That affected me, especially in our own city. Like, how could it not? How did it not make you think about something? I asked him, too, like, what his church's views are, and he said he didn't know. And so then I watched a sermon online
from his church
about sexual identity.
Okay.
And it was traditional. I told that to Ben, and his thoughts on it. He doesn't really have much to say about it, you know?
Oh, the sweet serendipity of that data compiled by Nancy Pearcey. And this clip from Love is Blind going viral on the same weekend. That's the story of Sarah and Ben on Love is Blind. Sarah dumps Ben at the altar. The reasons being that he doesn't care about Black Lives Matter and that his church has traditional views on marriage. Now, I've been told that his church is actually mischaracterized there and that they're actually pretty leftward on the issue of marriage and gender. But this woman would not marry this man because he's not left-wing enough. He's not a communist enough for her. Here's the problem. That young man should know what his church teaches. He should have opinions formed about Black Lives Matter. But he's kind of lazy on things that are important. That woman that you just heard there, she's a bride of the state, a bot. Whatever the regime wants, the old regime, in this case, whatever the regime wants, I want, because in truth, I'm never truly getting married to another man. I'm already married to the state. And so what you're seeing in some of the data that we just talked about is that it's not so much, I don't think, yet, at least not in Gen X and millennials. I do have more optimism for the Zoomers, though. I'm not sure what we're seeing amongst millennials and especially Xers is so much they're getting more conservative as they are. They're just not lefties. But that's not sufficient. And so you have this disconnect here, and it's growing by the year between young men and young women. The young women are already married. They're brides of the state. They're bots. The young men, and I'm hoping that I'm wrong, the young men are not engaged enough in the right ways. But again, I'm optimistic for Zoomers. All right, when we come back, it'll be air analysis. Gavin Newsom started a podcast and a civil war. We'll talk about that next. And finally, air analysis. Governor Poop Map of the great state of California decided to start a podcast with the goal, ostensibly, of rehabbing his public image at a national level ahead of the 2028 Democrat primary. That's the whole reason why he did this. Now, credit to him, as much credit as I can give a communist for coming up with an original idea. He thought it would be a good idea for him to start his podcast with a series of interviews with generals and lieutenants from the world of MAGA. His very first guest was TPUSA's Charlie Kirk.
It's like you right now should come out and be like, you know what? The young man who's about to win the state championship in the long jump in female sports, right. that shouldn't happen. You as the governor should step out and say no.
No, and I appreciate
but like, would you do something like that? Would you say no men in female sports?
Well, I think it's an issue of fairness. I completely agree with you on that. So that's easy to call out, the unfairness of that. There's also a humility and a grace, that these poor people are more likely to commit suicide, have anxiety and depression. And the way that people talk down to vulnerable communities is an issue that I have a hard time with as well. So both things I can hold in my hand. How can we address this issue with the kind of decency that I think, is inherent in you, but not always expressed?
So that is fascinating. Just fascinating. There's California Governor Gavin Newsom just saying, yeah, okay, we need to get the man out of female athletics. But we got to be nice about it. He also went, if you go back and you listen to him, he said, yeah, it's easy to say that we got to get the dudes out of the women's athletics. That's not easy for everybody to say, Governor Newsom. And then there's this. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries was asked about Governor Newsom's comments on trans so-called participation in female sports. Here was his answer.
Women and girls in sports. I haven't seen
total brain malfunction.
His comments, what Democrats opposed, was unleashing sexual predators on girls throughout the United States of America.
That's the Minions. What? What? Again, as we talked about on Friday, if I'm a tranny, if I'm a troon, listening to that from Hakeem Jeffries, I'm thinking, is he talking about me? Here's what I think is happening in the Democrat Party. Hakeem Jeffries wasn't the only one. Gavin Newsom set off a firestorm of individuals and groups getting on his tail, left-wing groups getting on his tail for not towing the line, lock, stock, and barrel on the issue of dudes who feel pretty spiking volleyballs into your daughter's faces. He started a mini civil war over there. Democrats are going to have to, and they're realizing, I think right now, some of them, like Gavin Newsom, are realizing that we cannot continue to emphasize this issue and expect to have national relevance in the short term or long run. But here's the dynamic that's going on in the Democrat Party right now. They have what I would characterize as a Prince Rupert's drop dynamic going on in the Democrat Party right now. You ever seen a video of Prince Rupert's drop? Prince Rupert's drop is what happens when you pour molten glass into a vat of chilled water or cold water. That causes that glass to cool rapidly. And it creates this really interesting phenomenon where you've got this kind of tear-shaped piece of glass that's pretty much indestructible on the fat part of the glass, the actual teardrop. But there's this tiny little tail that goes out several inches from the main part of the drop. Like I said, that drop is basically indestructible glass. But if you just flick the small end of Prince Rupert's drop with just your fingernail, the entire thing explodes. I think that dynamic is at play right now in the Democrat Party. They realize that, yes, as a coalition together, they are strong, but if they flick any of their most maybe inane, small, but most left-wing factions, the entire thing could explode. And so they're stuck. And on the issue of the most basic fact of creation, what is a man and what is a woman? This party could not deserve this dynamic more. That'll do it for Monday. Back at it again tomorrow. I'm Aaron McIntyre, and this is the AM Update.